We are in the condition we are in the state of ignorance we are in the state of war, in the state of economic depression, in the state of depletion of the resources of our planet because of the greed of psychopaths who thought they could create their own reality. Well, look at the reality they created.
You're listening to Sott Talk Radio, the world for people who think.
Hi, and welcome to Sott Talk Radio. This is Sunday, July 7th. I'm Joe Quinn. Jason's being obnoxious. With me is Neil Bradley.
Yes, I am.
Jason and Pierre.
Hello.
Hello. Some of you will already know we had a show planned for this week. Our guest, Hank Albarelli Jr., but unfortunately today he, due to unforeseen circumstances, was unable to appear. We'll maybe be able to schedule him again sometime in the future.
I hope so. He's got a lot to say.
Yeah. The show was mainly on the few books that he's written, mainly to do with a deeper look into the JFK assassination and the weird and strange coincidences around that, specifically involving, well, it involved so many different actors. Not actual actors here.
Dangerous term these days. That word has forever been tainted.
People have actually picked up on that word. The people who were promoting the Sandy Hook and Boston Marathon actors theory were picking up on that word being used by various U.S. officials at different times to say that they were basically just coming out and saying that they use actors. Right. Totally missing the fact that word is used as in the actors on
who did the act.
Well, on a stage, on a political stage or a global stage, or like people who do things. Yeah.
I think we should refer to them as perpetrators.
Yeah,
I try to. Perpetrators. The perpetrators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Albarelli's also done a lot of extensive research into the CIA mind control and biological warfare experiments, as well as JFK assassination, as Joe just mentioned. So it will be interesting to have him back on. We've got a couple of his books on the subject. We also have some of his articles on Sott. So I think they were put back up on the page today or refreshed, todayified. So you should see them there. Search for Albarelli.
Yeah. So in place of our interview with Hank, we have decided to go to Plan B, which we always have ready and waiting, or not. Plan B today is basically to have a general open discussion on various different topics that have occurred to us or may occur to us during the show, but also to provide an opportunity for our listeners who have been faithfully listening in every week for what number show is this? We're on 24?
23, but it's been 24 weeks.
Okay, for the last 24 weeks, people have been listening in faithfully, and we have had callers most weeks, but we just wanted to dedicate at least some part of the show, or maybe as much as you want to our listeners, to either write in via the chat function on the Blog Talk Radio website, or to call in, because we like to hear your voice, with any questions that you have on really any topic that has occurred to you. People have already...
Political or otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I mean, basically across the board, anything you want to discuss or you want us to give you a canned opinion on.
Canned opinion. even if we've already brought up the topic in a previous show, maybe there's something you want to clarify or something you didn't agree with.
Or something we didn't mention.
And in the course of today's conversation, even if we moved on from something, go ahead and bring it back up. So there's no problem, you don't have to wait for the right moment to interject.
Yes, and there's no kind of time limit on when you can call in either, if you want to call in right now.
Yeah, but try. We want to get lots of callers in, So
to try to get
maybe ask a question and then let us get to it type of thing. Short and sweet.
Absolutely. So people have already on our forum have already mentioned a few topics that they thought of immediately when they saw the opportunity to
grandstand.
To grandstand, no, not to grandstand, but to have their say or to bring up topics. One of them was the first one that I saw was the current events of meteor sightings in Brazil and Egypt at the peaks of demonstrations in those two countries. This is true. Yeah. There do appear to have been 2 meteorites seen flashing across the sky.
It's something we've been saying for a while. This stuff it attracts that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. We've talked about that, but it is interesting. I mean, on the one hand, you could turn around and say, well, listen, there's so many meteorites flying across the skies these days and nights, obviously, most particularly when people can see them best, that odds are, if there's a 5-day-long demonstration over a major city in Brazil
with like 1 million people, then
It raises an interesting question, though. Recently, we talked about the collapse of the probabilistic wave in quantum terms, i.e., what people think, the information they store in their memory might have an influence, create a kind of signal that might modulate or increase the probabilities of some cosmic events. From this point of view, we can wonder if it only works in a very global way, the lies accumulating for years and years all across the planet and leading to a global reaction made maybe by a cometary swarms with a lot of comets showering every day for several years. Or is this cosmic human reaction more local and more specific, and can, while the right conditions are here, can a mass demonstration modulate within this global cosmic reaction some specific events? You see what I mean? Global reaction versus specific one. And, I don't have the answer, but that's an interesting question. So, I play like a caller, and I have a question. Is it specific or global?
You are not a caller, Pierre. You are here to give the answers to the deepest mysteries.
I think it's not specific.
Well, just as some background, I had noticed that, in fact, there seemed to have been a drop-off in fireball reports. They were coming in all over the place every day throughout May, and then they seemed to slow down, at least, let's say, in mainstream reports and or bloggers posting articles about them. People were still reporting them to sites where you can go and give your details. I saw it here, went in this direction, it was this big, and so on. But there had seemed to be a relative drop-off. And just as I was wondering this, I saw these two, their mainstream news footage of the demonstrations taking place in, I think it was in Rio. Well, actually, the one in Brazil was seen in both Rio and Sao Paulo, so it was big enough to be seen across.
It's 400 kilometers apart. 400 kilometers.
Right.
Between Rio and Sao Paulo.
Yeah, it seemed to stand out. So it was not just a kind of a small little localized thing. It did seem to be large enough.
It's it might be the quietness before the storm, but in any case, it's probably not a linear event. I mean, if that's really a cometary swarm we're facing with comets, comet fragments, comet debris, dust, various kinds of asteroids in shapes and size, you won't have a linear progression of asteroid observation occurrence. And according to official database, the American Asteroid Society,
American Meteor Society,
AMS, you have in 2013, you had an increase for the first month of 2013. You have an increase of roughly 50% compared to the 2012 figures that were already very high and the highest since the beginning of the records in 2005. So overall, asteroid activity is on the increase up to now, globally, I mean, on average.
Yeah, I don't know.
Going back to this connection, though, what comes first? Change on the ground, and then some kind of reflection above.
Well, they say that like animals react to certain types of animals, especially like I'm not going to say the F word. The green little things kind of react. Don't do that. We have sensitive listeners.
At least one.
We have one sensitive listener who doesn't like that particular one. They react to earthquakes or any kind of storms, and dogs and cats. I mean, I've had dogs my entire life, and they start acting weird preceding a storm. You guys have observed that. Our dogs they go a little bit wonky when there's going to be some weird weather going on. So there is an argument for is all of the trouble going on here on the planet is that people sense that something is going to happen. Now that might be true, but at the same time, there's also this idea that they could influence it. That the very fact that things have come to this head in the world kind of can bring that down. And I think maybe in a certain sense it might be a little bit of both.
I concur somehow. I was writing about it today, and I think if we try to find what came first, the chicken or the egg, it's probably lies and suffering of humanity that comes first.
Yeah.
Okay, but once it's there, and that once it has triggered some cosmic reactions, you will have the government that will increase the lies spread within our minds in order to cover up what is going on, and basically to masquerade cosmically induced, related, and serious phenomena, to masquerade them as man-made, unrelated, minor phenomena. So that's why you have all those lies about man-made chemtrails, man-made global warming, pollution-induced or erosion-induced sinkholes, unexplained weakening Gulf Stream, unexplained meandering jet streams. So basically, while the process has started, the lies to maintain power add up to maintain initial imperial power, add up to new lies for the cover-up. So the lie factor, what I call the lie factor, increases, and might increase even more the cosmic reaction. Right. And more cosmic reaction, more social unrest, more doubts of the people, necessity of spreading more lies from the elites, and you have a vicious circle going on. You see?
Yeah, it's amplified.
Yeah.
And
it's a feedback loop, a negative feedback loop.
Well, it's interesting that we've gone way out there to the global picture, but if you look at each of the major demonstrations / revolutions, well, I think the major ones are Egypt, Turkey, Brazil, of course, and then Chile as well. Saw mass demonstrations recently. People are looking at them, and each one has their own kind of their own overarching narrative about why it's taking place. And then, of course, within that, you've got people on the streets saying, I'm protesting for this reason. No, I'm here for this reason. Now, it's certainly in Egypt, it's pretty cohesive. The message there from the people on the ground, the reason they're doing it, we want the government out. Which pretty much is the same message across the board. But there are different background factors. When Egypt first flared up, there was a major food crisis. They were rioting over food. Mm-hmm. In Chile, where 100,000 mainly high school students started protesting there before it inflamed into something bigger, the reasons given were a lot more specific to specific things the government was doing. It was not that the people were suddenly had their backups against the wall and couldn't feed themselves. If anything, in fact, Chile and Brazil also have become, on the whole, they've become wealthier countries in recent years.
I see where you're going. And indeed, oppression has always been there. Oppression goes hand in hand with empires and empires in the past and present empires. So we can wonder if it's only oppression and level oppression that triggers social unrest. And maybe, well, difficult to prove, but maybe on a more or less unconscious level, humanity or groups are picking up what is going on. And if you pick up what is going on, it proves it's an evidence of the breach of the fundamental contract that gives legitimacy to the elite, i.e., we are here to protect you. And if even just unconsciously you realize that what is going on, the elites cannot protect you against, then there are major clashes between the elites and the people to be that are very likely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That this is something that's largely taking place in the unconscious, even though it is made manifest, obviously, by getting out on the streets. If you were to actually look at someone's motives, well, the motives, they'll each give a different kind of angle on it, but what they share in common is probably what you suggested.
Well, one thing
a deep connection that something is fundamentally wrong here.
Yeah, this sense, unconscious collective sense that something wrong is going on. Just to go back to this cosmic human connection, is quite ironic when you think about it, that people believing in the lies of minor man-made phenomena, like what they call chemtrails, will increase the life factor and therefore increase the cosmic reaction. So by believing that it's minor, you increase the seriousness of the event. So ironically, by believing in man-made global warming, if this cosmic human connection is valid, you increase the cosmically induced global cooling. So that's quite a big nail in the coffin of the New Age crowd. You create your own reality, because it's somehow, when lies are everywhere or very widespread, you basically create a reality that is opposite to what you believe. Wrongly.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I was gonna pick out the one thing, because it's always a point that I like to harp on. You know, this whole security, the elites promise security, right? But they can't protect you from cosmic things. They can't protect you from natural disasters. But you know, in a certain sense, that would be okay if they could protect you from all the other stuff that goes on in the world. But they are completely incompetent in that arena too. They didn't protect the people from 9/11, if you believe that really happened. They don't protect you from all the murderers and the drug dealers and all this different stuff. And a woman gets raped every 3 minutes in the United States. All this different stuff. I mean, there's all this stuff that goes on in your life. You're, being taken advantage of by con men, losing all your money, losing your job, not being able to feed your kids, and not having health care. They don't protect you. If they did that job right, if they did all those jobs well, and then there was this whole, oh yeah, by the way, they can't protect you from cosmic stuff, it would be like, can't do everything. But it's like they can't even do what they promised to do, so they sure as hell can't do this other stuff.
But if they did what they said, i.e. protecting us from earthly events, you might not get those cosmic reactions.
True. But
ironically, you see the lies, actually the elites that we believe to be here to protect us against any threat, including cosmic threats, might be the very reason why those cosmic reaction occurs, because of the lies that spread.
But even bringing it down to
how ironic it is.
Yeah, it's very ironic. But even bringing it back down to a purely earthly level, totally on an earthly level. I mean, if everybody in America or something like that, because I'm an American, I speak obviously about America, but it's a problem all over the world right now. If everybody had a job, if nobody was starving, if there wasn't this rampant crime going on all over the place, if there were people being murdered and people being raped and people being scammed and cheated and stuff like that, if there weren't those things, then you could almost say that it's at least, you're kind of getting what you pay for when you trade off these certain freedoms and this certain privacy and stuff like that, right? You'd almost say that at least I'm getting something for what I'm paying for, but here you're not getting anything at all. They haven't succeeded at all forever since the beginning. So, I mean, it's even worse.
I don't know. I think it's at the basic level, what people look to authority figures for is not necessarily to protect them, but to kind of make decisions for them, to take care of the big decisions and stuff that is beyond what they see as their scope to decide upon, like especially in terms of nation states and large numbers of people. Need the smart people to make the decisions on the important issues, that are beyond what the average person believes is beyond his ability to really make a good decision on. And a lot of people like that as well, because if they see there's major decisions to be made, they don't necessarily want to take the responsibility for making those decisions themselves. So I think the basis of leaders, or the idea of leaders or an authority in society, is basically for decision making, and when important decisions for the group need to be made, you have a small coterie of elected or appointed whatever leaders who will take responsibility, and that's fine for the average person as long as they make good decisions and nothing goes wrong and stuff, But this idea that the leaders are there to protect people, I think that has to be introduced. It has to be fabricated in a certain sense, that some kind of an enemy, some kind of a threat to the people. It's used by corrupt leaders who really don't have the best intentions of the people at heart, and but they want to stay in power nevertheless. So they fabricate an enemy against which or from which they can then claim to have to protect the people, and the people believe that, and they say, okay, we'll let these people stay in power because after all, they did take care of the bad guys. You know what I mean? What was this threat to us? Well,
I'm not saying like that's to me that seems slightly, I don't know if the word would be like tautological or something, but the states came into being and existed to protect people from other states, is like they exist to perpetuate their own existence, is sort of a little bit, the state and government kind of had to have started from, I think, another germ inside of society than just, nations formed after the concept of governments. They started in sort of like this tribal thing, and a bunch of people running around in a tribe. Why would they have a headman in a tribe? You can't say necessarily they only did that because there was another tribe 5 miles down the place and then they had to fight them or something. That there's some other reason for people to actually choose leaders.
Well, that's what I just said.
Yeah, but not to protect them from other tribes.
But I didn't say that.
Or to make the big decisions necessarily.
To make important decisions for the pride, not to protect them, but the basis of it was for them, that the capable member or members of the tribe who showed some natural proclivity for intelligence or whatever, who would be looked to for advice on certain matters, and then became the head of the tribe, who would then take care and make important decisions for the tribe. That was the basis of the idea of leadership. Mm-hmm. But that this idea of them having to protect the people against a threat, that I think is fairly, obviously it could have evolved when there was a threat to the tribe, etc. But in more recent times, a lot of it's been manufactured in order to justify the continuance in power of this elite, who just say, listen, well, here's a threat and we need to protect you from it, and you need us, so shut up.
So on a earthly level, it's like at the cosmic level and earthly level is the same. The leaders who are supposed to protect us are actually the cause for the threats, earthly and cosmic, that are threatening us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get on that topic? Oh, yeah.
Because of
comets. Comets, meteorites. I don't know. Electrical, if they're an electrical phenomenon, is there some aspect of a large group of people together all getting very excited, generating some kind of an electrical charge together that could attract? This is a question. I'm a listener now, Pierre, and I'm asking you a question.
I don't know.
That's a bit too far out there.
For months, I've been looking for this answer, and there might be a connection between electricity and information indeed, since electricity comes from some order within the movement and the localization of electrons. So there might be a correlation here between information, i.e. order, and electricity. This being said, you have this study I mentioned previously conducted by Professor Jan from Princeton and Duns, Brenda Duns, I think, who showed that human beings do have an influence on random events, very tiny though. However, people that are related have a much stronger influence on random events. And this being related, it doesn't mean necessarily having the same genotype, the same genes, because it was within family, but also it was this synergy also happened within couples. So apparently, it's more sharing same cultural background, information, beliefs, wrong or right, that creates this resonance and this synergetic dynamic in the way a group influence random, quote-unquote, events. From this perspective, reasoning by analogy, we can hypothesize that 1 million people thinking the same thing, believing the same thing, because we could talk about it, what you think consciously, what you believe deeply, are sometimes very different, and what really matters is what you feel, what you believe deeply, which is sometimes contrary to what you think consciously. And in any case, when people resonate on the same frequency, let's say, same belief frequency, yes, they can have a huge impact on quote-unquote random events.
Well, there's a comment here from Paschalis, who says that he kind of, I'm not sure what he's disagreeing with, but he says, I disagree. I think the main reason why humanity is attracting catastrophes is not because psychopaths are in control or power, but because the overwhelming majority of normal people stay sound asleep about the fact.
I think somehow he's right, or at least as far as the choice is concerned. Today, the situation is that there's a huge amount of lies, a huge amount of suffering. It comes from the leading psychopath who inflict this misery on people. But what Paschalis is true is that indeed, if we want to change the expected gloomy future, we cannot wait for the psychopath to change, because this oppression, those lies, torturing others is their nature.
You can never get rid of psychopaths.
And you cannot change their nature. They are the way they are, and we cannot transform them in conscious, compassionate beings. So, indeed, the responsibility, ultimately, to change this gloomy future lies on our shoulders. We are the only conscious people can change. Psychopaths will not change.
Yep.
No, there's been a concerted effort to actually turn the population, or to psychopathologize or to ponerize the population, to turn the population of the planet into psychopaths, or to certainly, at the very least, make them view the world or view life and human relations from a psychopathic point of view. That's been ongoing for a long, long time, and it's kind of interesting because there's all this talk about having to, how can we cure psychopaths, when in fact it's the psychopaths in power, and they're kind of the infection of psychopathic ideas that have spread through the population has led to kind of questions of how to cure human beings of their normal human responses. Or certainly that's the way psychopaths seem to kind of
I think they see us normal humans as a disease that needs to be cured,
an aberration.
Yeah. It is they who have evolved perfectly, and the normal population, where something is wrong and they need to be re-educated.
Well, the whole idea of people doubting, it's so much easier if you don't doubt, if you're just totally sure of what you believe, and you just go ahead, you see something, you want it, you go get it. It's all very effective and efficient, the way that they go about it, I suppose. Of course, it doesn't take into consideration human emotions, and that's one thing that they are severely lacking in terms of any real effect that those emotions might have in their lives, So,
I think what they're missing is the ability to agree.
Who?
The psychopaths. The psychopaths can get together, right? And they can plan and plot for mutual benefit. But they never really agree with each other. They're always trying to one-up each other and stab each other in the back. And that's their ultimate flaw, is that they don't have this ability to network together and agree. And, like Pierre was saying there a minute ago about a whole bunch of people coming together and believing something deeply or feeling something very deeply, that has some sort of effect energetically, I guess, with the universe. And it says this stuff in many kind of like religious texts, and Jesus even said, if even two of you should agree, that will give you a great amount of power. And that's what the regular human has. We have the ability to share each other's minds in a way that a psychopath never can. Two psychopaths cannot share their mind, but two normal people, through the process of empathy, can share The process of engaging those mirror neurons can share each other's minds in a kind of roundabout sense, not like this whole psychic, new age way, but I can have some form of mental experience of what you are feeling or thinking or agree with you at a deeper level, whereas a psychopath cannot do that. So in the immediate situation, he just sees something, goes for it, and it seems like such a successful strategy in the short term. And in the short term, it's a very successful strategy, and they prove that again and again. But human history is told in millenniums. I mean, we look back at human history and we talk about, the human has been kind of somewhat similar to what he is now for 60,000 years. How many empires have risen and fallen from their own interior corrosion and corruption of these psychopaths who say, oh, we're so good. They get up to the top of the pile, and then, they spent so much time building it up really quickly, the foundations of it crumble, and they tumble down, and everybody dies with them. And so, I mean, obviously, they're not very evolved in that sense of the word.
I agree that no two psychopaths can agree. However, they're
having the same idea of
their extremely mechanical nature means that they will always end up doing the same thing.
Yeah, mechanistically.
In a way, it is a kind of similar bonding together that normal humans have, except it doesn't work through a limbic system because for whatever reason, their limbic system, that thing that gives people empathy between each other, is not functioning correctly or works differently.
And remember, one of the features of the limbic system is limbic resonance. So psychopath, just to summarize, psychopath might be limited in two ways as far as this human cosmic connection is concerned. First, they are masters of wishful thinking. They see the world as they want it to be. And if this connection is valid, probably the way to avoid a gloomy future is to see the world as it is, objectively, which psychopaths are totally unable to. So they cannot change the future in this aspect. But the other handicap of psychopaths is that they cannot tap, apparently, in this field, in this system, this limbic resonance system, or what shall we call this morphic field, that allows people to resonate in the same frequency and to create some synergetic effects and have a more potent punch.
So Lisa asks, why is it important for people to learn about psychopathy, and how can it be used to help them to defend themselves against those with a pathological mindset?
Knowledge is power.
Well, we recently had what appears to be going down as the world's largest demonstration, where 20 million people were speaking of the same voice and the same mind in Egypt. If those people were aware that cheering their military elite, who actually sit on top of their elected leaders, i.e. above and beyond, if they realize their true nature, immediately that naivety about, oh, the army can protect us, would fall.
Another reason to get aware of psychopathy, which is probably the most important topic, is that I think that psychopathy is responsible for maybe 99% of the suffering on Earth. Suffering of the planet, suffering of the animals, suffering of the human beings. I think that without the psychopathic factor and the subsequent polarization, this twisting of our minds, losing our most fundamental human values, I think Earth could be a paradise.
Absolutely. But let me ask this question. If you live in a jungle, are you better off knowing about snakes or not knowing about them? And does just knowing about them protect you from snakes completely? Is it still possible to get bitten? Or will you, when you look out for snakes and know where snakes hide, don't step on certain areas, don't step on logs, don't step over them, things like that. If you know those rules, if you know that they exist, and you try to watch out for them, you reduce the chances of you being a victim of a snake bite.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with a psychopath. It doesn't mean that you never will get bitten, or there's no guarantee. But knowing about a danger, or not, you should always choose to know about a danger. If they exist, then you have to say they exist and they're dangerous, and these are the things that they do. Specifically, reading something like, political ponerology, which, kind of has a systematic study of how they act in a macro-social political milieu, that's fundamentally important.
And even if you know about psychopathy, you're still partly blind about some facets of the phenomenon, i.e., even if you're an expert in psychopathy, you won't be able, I don't think you will be able, to detect psychopaths.
No,
so it's
that is not
partly unsolvable problem.
I don't think that is the goal to keep in mind. No. When it comes to this, there is a lot of stuff out there, and you get these new people on the scene who they position themselves as educators on this topic, and one of their main selling points is that, I can tell you in 20 quick steps how to spot a psychopath.
They're usually
check out this video here. Look at her eyes. See how she does that? Definitely a psychopath. Not only is that nearly always wrong, but it's beside the point. It's something. It's an awareness that once you have it, stays with you.
Well, if you take the fact that psychopaths, or if you accept the idea that psychopaths are fundamentally different from human beings and that they lack empathy, then the best way to be able to spot a psychopath is to increase your own awareness and ability, or abilities in terms of empathy. Not that they're abilities, but increase your own empathic nature, and to pursue things that increase that, because that's the best way you're going to be able to identify them as different from you, because that's the problem. The jungle analogy is a good one, but the problem is that
you cannot see the snakes.
You can't see the snakes that are exactly like you, and with a long process of, if we use a snake analogy, there's been a long process of turning human beings, or making human beings, encouraging human beings to act like snakes, so that they don't identify the snakes amongst them. Because, in the modern world, you take a person who could be clinically proven, let's say, to not be a psychopath, but you could identify several or many psychopathic traits within that person because they have been infected with them over many, many years, many generations. So probably the best way to do it then, and you kind of kill two birds with one stone in a certain sense. Not only do you make the world a better place by increasing your levels of empathy or conscience, you also are better able to spot someone who is acting in an unconscionable way. Unconscionable way.
Yeah, I think that we cannot spot psychopaths unlike snakes, but what we can spot is the effects of psychopathy, polarization on the society, on the values in books, in movies, in ourselves, because nobody is immune to polarization, and everybody, to some extent, consciously or not, has adopted some psychopathic trait. So what we can fight against is not psychopath, but against the effects of psychopathy. And in the end, if what really matters is the state of humanity, is this cosmic reaction, is the state of the earth, having psychopath or not is not really the problem. You can have psychopath if you manage somehow to cancel the nefarious effects induced by psychopaths, i.e. polarization.
Well, that brings up this, we have an article on the Sott page, you should go read it, Sott.net, by this guy who wrote that book about, what's his name, Paul Levy, wrote the book about the Wedico. He's really into this whole shamanism stuff, and he quotes from a book by a guy named Wesselman who went and interviewed some Hawaiian shaman. And in part of this book, the Hawaiian shaman talks about the Iipa, or whatever it is, which is the kind of the Hawaiian shamanistic tradition's version of the Wedico, who he describes them as a kind of a malevolent energy that infects the minds of people, which I thought was really interesting, because they weren't necessarily saying so much about this whole idea of essential psychopathy, but that there's something that actually goes out and starts to infect people's minds, and then it slowly takes them over. So at first it's just small things, and then they get more and more inured into this evil system. And the whole idea being basically is that the Iipa, or whatever it is, this Wedico kind of energy, basically starts to take over the person's mind and then creates like this facsimile of them that it uses to, in their name, kind of do all these horrible things, and that they slowly, their inner essence or whatever it is, gets suppressed deep inside them and sort of cornered off. And so that they have this sort of little bit of actual humanity inside them, but it becomes, just basically bogged down by this evil kind of energy. So I thought that was interesting, especially with where the conversation was going, is that, it's not just psychopaths, it's people who sort of take on, they get polarized, take on psychopathic traits and start believing psychopathic ideals.
Yeah. So there's some examples now, since we're on this topic, we can maybe look at some examples of that polarization or psychopathologization.
I like polarization.
Yeah, just trying to make sure people know what it's a shorter word, definitely.
Zombification?
Zombification. There's a lot of zombie movies, yeah. And that's a weird one. I can't get my head around the zombie movie.
Psychopathification.
Yeah.
I think zombies are a totally separate thing than the polarization.
What I can't get my head around is the upsurge or the plethora of.
Have you met most people today?
of zombie movies that are just coming out in the past, 10 years. I know the idea has been around for a long time, but there seems to be a lot of them. It's very popular these days, and it's maybe that's it's a reflection of some kind of mass consciousness that is being given off. Maybe this ties into the idea of comets and what we're trying to get at. It's a very abstract concept, but maybe it ties into it in some way, in the sense that human thought is actually in some way material.
Yeah.
And people talk about vibration, the vibration of your thoughts and all this kind of stuff, but maybe what they should really be talking about is the electrical polarity or the electrical charge. And maybe in terms of differences in electric charge given off by thoughts, simply what's in someone's head, and that may in some way gravitate some kind of other electrical phenomenon in the universe,
Well, the zombies also seem to me like a striking materialization of two phenomena who are occurring more and more in our modern society. The feeding phenomena, figuratively speaking, and the dead inside phenomena.
The self-tranquilization.
And more you have people who are sadly more and more dead inside, living dead, and more you have people who feed on others. You have like those people who keep complaining or who keep, you see what I mean, this feeding, emotional feeding mechanism.
I wonder, we're speaking in psychological terms, and you just said figuratively, but getting back to Paul Levy's idea about a virus, I wonder if there's a literal component here.
Right.
To get back to Lisa's question, what's a good reason for knowing about this and how it works? Well, it could literally be that in some way we cannot see, but perhaps feel some energetic sense that your energy, so to speak, is taken from you.
And also, you can take it into a disease kind of analogy where,
Well, it is spoken in those terms in political phonology and by other psychologists.
It's a communicative
today.
disease, communicable disease.
I think there's a whole science here that has not been discovered yet, or not been is unknown to us. That there may be an actual, as real as our current
it's kind of like
science is. There's another level of science that would define
psychological oncology, or something.
That would define human thought as something tangible and measurable and
communicable.
Maybe the science is there for that. It's just not available to the public. Maybe if the CIA have it,
but people have access to it nonetheless. When people see millions of their fellow people on the streets, I'm watching it. How can you not be affected by the energy? In some way you are drawn in and you are excited about it, or you hate it for whatever reason. You're definitely affected.
Well, that's a whole area for science that science should be looking into, because you talk about mob, the kind of mob and mob rule, and the kind of the way that a large group of people will can act as one almost, and can all influence each other. Well, what's influencing there? They talk about these things the way the fervor or the excitement amongst the mob where they'll all kind of work off each other. What's working off each other? Is there not something tangible there that could theoretically be quantified in scientific terms?
I think
it's not just visual, you know what I mean? Because people describe, a feeling or a sensation, or it's more than just I see the guy beside me doing something, I'm going to do the same. It's not just a thought process. It's an exchange of some kind of energy or something,
There might be several levels, but on the thought levels, or information, memories, there are several cases showing that some human beings, or even in rats, say rats because it's less gross, some rats they learned the path to get some food, and they got areas from their brain removed. This one neutralized, this one. In the end, all the areas were removed, were tested in various rats, were removed. Part A in rat A, part B in rat B, and all of the rats. Sometimes they were really crippled, but they managed to go back to find immediately the path. So that's one of and there are many research about the non-material and non-localized nature of memory. So, in this sense, the brain might be in this physical realm the emitter and the receptor that connects us to, let's call it a field, a memory field or thought fields that is so far undiscovered, untangible, unmeasurable so far. And so I think to answer your question, Joe, there might be both. Mm-hmm. There are some tangible manifestation, electricity in the brain, neuronal signals, but that are just a manifestation or more global, non-local. And this non-local property of memories, of information, of thoughts can explain all those supraliminal transmission connections between individuals. There might be other ones at some other energetic level, at instinctual level, emotional level. It's just about the information level.
Yeah. Like how do two people who maybe they're friends or maybe they're related, like twins, how do they pick up on the same thing simultaneously on separate continents?
Yeah.
I mean, I know there are studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even just like regular people inventing similar things or writing similar things, without any possibility for communication. We're talking about like historically,
Sheldrake gives an interesting example that
who's
on average,
Sheldrake?
Rupert Sheldrake, the author and
scientist. He wrote a book called The New Science of Life.
He created the concept of morphic fields, morphic resonance, morphogenic fields. And he mentioned one of the studies that show that on average, people do crosswords quicker when the crosswords are old.
Right.
I.e., as if somewhere, somehow, in what he called a morphic field, the solutions, the knowledge was stored and available partly in an unconscious way to the ones who will do the old crosswords after the pioneers who took more time to find a solution.
After other people did it.
Yeah. And you find it in apprenticeship, in learning acceleration, basically, of any learning curves. And you even find it in one fascinating example is about formation of crystals. You find that because basically crystal, a solid form of a liquid, is more organized, there's more information in it. And you see so that crystals, they form quicker and quicker, easier and easier with time. You use the same process, exactly the same condition, the same temperature, same pressure. And the process gets easier and easier.
Yeah. He's got in his book, I think it's called The New Science of Life or something like that. He's got loads of great examples. The rat one, I think, is in that one. And he's got great stuff. And there's a video. He did a video as well, a video lecture that also has some supplementary material.
And before to move on to the other topics, I would like to say two things. First, about those Brazilian demonstration. It's really interesting that what triggered those demonstrations is that Brazil is supposed to organize the Soccer World Cup.
Yeah, next year.
Next year in 2014. Brazil is the main nation as far as soccer is concerned. It's
They love that.
a religion over there, a religion. And interestingly, the very same soccer fans, Brazilian soccer fans, are not, for once, they're not investing all their energy and beliefs and cheerfulness into supporting soccer. But now they invest the energy to protest against the World Cup. And actually, they protest against the fact that billion are being spent to build new stadiums, etc., while people are starving to death, which is quite a legitimate reaction.
Well, yeah.
So it's a...
Just a small question. They're not starving to death. I mean, people are, of course. There is a massive underclass in Brazil.
Right.
Less. It's getting better. Agreed.
Their specific argument was that this should be money going into public services.
Priority services.
Yep.
And the second point is that to give us some hope about this life factor, about this signal humanity might send. Lies versus truth. Actually, truth has a fundamental advantage. Usually lies about one fact. There can be many, many lies, many wrong ways to describe a fact. Like 9/11, some people think this, some people think that. Some various people resonate on various lie frequencies. They adopt various lies instead of the truth. But the truth is one about this fact or that fact. So it means about coherence of the signal, why the lie signal are not perfectly coherent, because people usually don't believe different lies that might actually sometimes cancel each other.
Right.
The truth signal doesn't require such a high critical mass of people to have the same effect or the contrary effect.
Right, because for the most part, I mean, some complex truths might exist where there's, in mathematics and in physics, perhaps. But generally speaking, I mean, most of the fundamental truths of the world are very simple and very direct, Mm-hmm. There's no complexity. There's no... people try to make it all, it's not that simple. And it's just sometimes it is. The government lies. That's what they do.
Most of the time, I think it's a red flag when you see mainstream science, those highly convoluted explanations requiring all those complicated phenomena. Or sometimes you read some papers and say, that's a very complex phenomenon. And I think most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, it is a red flag because scientists are aware that what they are saying is not totally consistent, so they have to invoke, to muddy the water, to lose the reader, so the reader cannot see the flaws in the reasoning.
Right. Speaking of football in Brazil, there's a story, I think I just saw it in the news today. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, relatively recently. There was a football match, and in a local town somewhere in Brazil, a local, not a major football match, but a local football match, but there was plenty of supporters there and stuff, and the referee gave one of the players a red card, and the player didn't take too well to that and kicked the referee or attacked the referee in some way, and the referee was packing a knife and pulled a knife out.
Pulled out his Kershaw and
pulled out a knife and stabbed the player in the chest, and the player then died on the way to hospital. And the crowd turned on the referee, that was supposedly the supporters of the player that was stabbed, and they started to beat him. And eventually they cut his head off.
I think they quartered him and cut his head off.
Yeah, I saw pictures of it. They tried to cut off his arms and his legs. They cut off part of his legs. Well, they kind of half succeeded, but they apparently succeeded in cutting his head off.
Right. So
that's an interesting story from Brazil, football related, coming right after the protests about ostensibly about the spending on the World Cup in 2016 and or 2014, and
I think we're going to see extremes of everything.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, people marching on the streets in unison an extreme compared to the norm, which is sit at home and watch TV and do nothing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to see the other side, which is, well, cannibalism.
Right.
People actually devouring each other to pieces. I mean, we've seen a few stories in the last couple of years.
I think if the world survives into the next 10 years, I think if each year progressively things are going to get worse. And we're going to see this kind of like the age-old sins of governments and peoples. It's just going to get worse with these people, you know?
Yeah, disintegration, I suppose.
Total disintegration of law, which we see today.
Well, it's starting already. I mean, that was one of the things we wanted to talk about in the U.S., you know, and we're... Go ahead.
Oh, can I? Yeah, because this is kind of on this, but as a lead-in. On the Sott page, there's this thing about the DUI stop on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
Now, I don't remember when I was in America that this was not really a practice. This whole traffic stop thing, like this, it wasn't really a practice. I had never really heard of it. When I came to France, it was very shocking because the French are really obsessed with this thing called the control routier, I guess they call it, or something like that. It's very common. And to me, as an American, I came here, I thought that this was like a military dictatorship when I saw, the gendarmes and the police, they have these control routiers. They're everywhere. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, it's totally normal. But for me, as an American, I thought that this was really unusual. I got to stop and, give my license and answer a bunch of questions to this random police stop. I wouldn't do anything wrong. But there's this guy in America on the 4th of July. They had this DUI stop. I guess it's a practice.
What does DUI?
Driving under the influence.
See if you have alcohol, which is definitely something they do in France. And so he's got this camera in the side of his car, and he's videotaping this. And the cop at one point, and this is the craziest thing ever, cop at one point says to him, the Constitution doesn't apply during a traffic stop. And I was just like, for an American to say that, it's just mind-boggling. Of course a cop's going to say that, in now you expect it. But really, you got to remember that a cop's still an American. And an American ever saying that the Constitution doesn't apply, it's mind-boggling, to be honest.
They've been conditioned. They've been trained at this point.
This guy was definitely
that if somebody gives you cheek back and appeals to the Constitution, that means he's using that as a way to break the law or something, or hoodwink you. So in his mind, he actually thinks, I am being totally constitutional. This guy is just using it to try and slither past me.
He's abusing the Constitution. That'll be an offence. Misuse of the verbal misuse of the Constitution.
Pretty soon it's going to be. Either you're violating the Constitution or you're not.
Yeah. Well, I haven't spent much time in the U.S., but from what I've seen over the past few years, there seems to be a lot of police presence on the roads in the U.S., a lot of stops and stuff. And comparatively, I thought that actually in France there were quite few. I see around here, I see, the Keystone cops up the road there, stopping people. But usually they're looking for dodgy-looking people in dodgy-looking cars, and they're hoping to find that they don't have any insurance or something like that, And then I think once I've been stopped and asked to blow into a little tube and that was on a Sunday afternoon. Because they were trying to get people coming back from Sunday lunch. The Frenchies would be quaffing several bottles of wine of a Sunday lunch time and driving back home. So, but in France, when I drive around the roads and stuff, I see very few, especially in the highways. I see a lot of traffic cameras, but I don't see a lot of police presence.
That's a good point. Actually, most of the contrôle routier or contrôle d'identité, ID controls or road controls, are performed against foreigners, about black people and Arabic people.
Driving while Arabic?
Yeah, that's a major offense in France, apparently. It's highly suspicious, at least. And the other thing is that while there is this major focus, kind of fascism against speed, with literally speed cam everywhere on the roads, you have a surprising leniency as far as alcohol consumption is concerned. And actually, statistics are here. It's one of the main causes of death on the road is it's teenagers going to nightclubs, drinking on Saturday night, getting drunk, and having car crash. That's a sad truth. So it would be very easy for cops to get people with a alcohol rate that is too high. You just wait at the exit of the nightclubs at 3 in the morning on Sunday morning, and you get a lot of fines and a lot of money. But they don't do that. They don't do that. Why? There are possible explanations that are not mutually exclusive. The first reason is that alcohol in France is a big business. It's a country of wine, and you can have advertising for alcohol in France, but advertising for cigarettes is forbidden. You see the asymmetry. It's a big lobby. There's also, it's difficult. Obviously, the objective of the authorities is not to minimize the number of people dying on the roads. There are some other objectives that are at work.
Money.
Yeah.
It's levying taxes.
Even then, you'd think that they'd make more money if they actually went after. Because like Bill Hicks said, nobody smokes 4 or 5 cigarettes and then, runs over somebody because they're too inebriated to drive.
I think the reason in both countries is the same. It's to project a permanent presence of being watched.
Yeah, you're being watched. The control. Even in France, they call it a control. Control is all about control. Everything, every sort of government interference with people's lives is prefixed by the word control. And it's amazing.
I think the problem in the U.S. And there has been, like we just said, there has been a real upswing in the number of reports of police brutality or police strong arm tactics against civilians, and I think it's fair to say that in the developed, oh so wonderfully democratic and free West, that the U.S. stands out or stands head and shoulders above the rest in terms of as leading the pack in terms of these kind of police brutality type situations, because we just don't hear about them so much in other countries. Sure, there are countries, and this is always held up to people when they complain about the U.S., that, the very fact that you can drive down the road, or the very fact that you can, speak your mind, it's becoming less and less possible, but still that you can speak your mind is an evidence of the freedom that you enjoy, where other countries don't. And for example, sure, like in the protests in Egypt recently, several people were killed, were shot by the military, and that hasn't happened in the US because there hasn't been a mass demonstration in the US. I wonder what would happen if the equivalent number of people, because if you, like you said earlier on, 20 million people in Egypt, that's about a quarter of the population. So you'd have to have 70 million plus people in the US, all more or less together demonstrating. I wouldn't like to imagine what would happen in that situation if things got out of hand. But the problem with the US is that it comes in for maybe a bit more flack than is deserved, in the sense that, or for the reason that they make so much of their freedom and democracy. If you're up there grandstanding and touting your wonderful freedoms and claiming that you're spreading around the world, well, then any incidents of lack of freedom, of clear breach of civil liberties is going to really stand out,
It does.
And there have been plenty of them of late. Like, for example, there were a few that I just noted down. One of them was recently in Charlottesville. It was in the Charlottesville Daily Progress, a newspaper. Shortly after 10 p.m., this is in April, a University of Virginia student bought ice cream, cookie dough, and a carton of sparkling water from a grocery store in a popular shopping center. She took this out of the shopping center, got into her car with a few of her friends. He was a teenager, basically, and a half a dozen men and a woman approached her car, flashing some kind of badges, but they were in plain clothes. One of them jumped on the hood, and another drew a gun, and the other started breaking the windows. So this girl basically freaks out and tries to
She drove away.
She starts her car up to try and close the windows at least, because she didn't know who these people were. They were attacking her car. And she got a little bit out of the parking lot, and one of them called 911, and there was a police car not far away, and he came over and told her that they were members.
Some new thing that I've never heard of before. It's like some alcohol in
the people who had swarmed. The girl's surname is Daly. The people who had swarmed Daly's vehicle were plainclothes agents of the Virginia Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control.
I didn't know such a thing could even exist.
And they thought that the sparkling water was a 12-pack of beer.
Wow.
Of course, they didn't apologize, and what actually happened was that the girl, the owner of the car, was charged with 3 felonies. 2 for assaulting an officer, which was based on that when she drove away, her vehicle had grazed 2 agents, neither of whom were hurt, and 1 for eluding the police. So obviously an outrageously disproportionate display of force.
I think ultimately they dropped the charges, though, didn't they?
They did whenever they showed that it was actually sparkling water rather than beer. That was the only reason.
It's ridiculous.
There was another guy, A.J. Marin, was arrested in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for writing in chalk on the sidewalk. You probably heard about this one. He was participating in a healthcare demonstration outside Governor Tom Corbett's residence when he wrote, "Governor Corbett has health insurance, we should too." And authorities charged him with writing a derogatory remark about the governor on the sidewalk.
Since when is that a crime? What about freedom of speech?
And then another guy who also wrote chalk messages outside the Bank of America, this was last year, he wrote "Stop Big Banks" in chalk on the pavement. He was, they brought 13 vandalism charges against him. And the bank actually claimed that it cost them $6,000 to clean up the chalk on the sidewalk.
Right.
You know, I didn't think a hose and some water was that expensive, but there you go. And in May this year, just 2 months ago, a Texas woman was arrested for asking to see a warrant for the arrest of her 11-year-old son. So police came to arrest her 11-year-old son. She said, "Can I see a warrant?" So they arrested her. She spent the night in jail while her son was left at home alone.
But they came for him.
And the son was never arrested.
Yeah.
This thing in the U.S. where resisting an officer,
right,
or assaulting an officer because you show the slightest bit of physical resistance to being pummeled by some 10-foot gorilla.
Yeah.
It's just...
There's so many others, you know.
I mean, the idea you can be arrested for resisting arrest.
And that's very similar to what we were saying previously, actually. The very people that we are paying for protecting us, i.e. cops, are actually the ones who are threatening us.
Yeah.
And acting violently against the people.
It really is getting out of control. I mean, there's the whole gun culture in the U.S. and the big news about over the past year, the Department of Homeland Security have placed orders for billions, I think, 1.6 billion in total, hollow point bullets.
Was it like 3 per person? It was like a Mozambique.
More. Yeah. I think it was
into Mozambique, the entire U.S. population.
Yeah. And there's a story about a Minneapolis-based company called Law Enforcement Targets Incorporated that has received $2 million in contracts from the Department of Homeland Security. They recently began selling cardboard cutout targets that were designed to desensitize police to non-traditional threats.
Right.
These non-traditional threats included pregnant women, mothers in school playgrounds, and little boys, as well as elderly gun owners in their homes. I have some pictures here of them, actually. That's, they're cardboard cutouts of real people, a pregnant woman holding a gun, a background in her home, an old guy holding a shotgun,
a
little kid holding a gun, and a girl with a woman with a child and an old lady holding a gun. It's
between this and the zombie apocalypse they're conditioning people for the most horrific showdown possible.
Well, the owner of the company who makes these said that he said on a radio show that he's a spokesman for the company, said that the targets were designed to combat hesitation on the part of cops when deadly force is required on subjects with atypical age, frailty, or condition.
Yeah, atypical. That's like Marine Corps research when they found that soldiers predominantly shot over people's heads until they changed the targets to human-shaped targets and improved the rifleman efficiency.
Yeah, it sounds like a desensitization.
Absolutely, because people don't like shooting other people.
Exercise, those pregnant women and children cardboard pictures.
I mean, that's an attempt to polarize the policeman.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
We're talking about the deepest human values, this empathy and compassion. And for human beings to kill another human beings, it's something almost impossible. You had those statistics during the World War where some leaders realized that 95% of the soldiers were not shooting at the enemies. They were shooting in the air. Yep. They were shooting on the ground. They were not shooting the enemies voluntarily. Yep. Because you have to transgress a big taboo, yep. Killing someone. And, it's been going on for decades, those first-person shooter games that are so widespread. It's one way to further this desensitization, those cardboard things, and in the end, what they want is a psychopathic individual, i.e., individuals who don't care about killing people or even enjoy killing them.
Yeah, absolutely. The
U.S. recently marked Independence Day, celebration of the Declaration of Independence, independence from tyranny, independence from persecution, independence from government overreach, independence from excessive taxation. And here we are 237 years later.
Oh, man, I guess I'm thinking...
Could they be any more dependent?
Yeah. There's no words to describe what a farce the whole thing is, I mean, what a farce it is. The Declaration of Independence in and of itself, like we have the whole, we find these truths to be self-evident. And like the very next paragraph, and if we find that our government doesn't satisfy us, we are obligated to take it down, basically. I mean, it's just such a farce the way that America is right now with this Declaration of Independence and our independence and all this stuff. I mean, did you know that Benjamin Franklin, all of those guys, Madison, they were actually did not plan on being independent from the crown? Like, they didn't want it. Like, they thought that they just wanted better representation for taxes. I mean, that's it. I mean, it got conflated into this whole revolution. But really, they didn't want it. They just accidentally won, and then they decided to rewrite history into this gigantic conflated thing that was all about
maybe the one who were pulling their strings did not accidentally win. I mean, history shows that revolutions sometimes start spontaneously, but sooner or later it's being co-opted, it's being manufactured to serve the interest of the ones who pull the string. I don't know much. The French Revolution, the English Revolution, it was not this as depicted by mainstream media and official history, the spontaneous people movement who insurrect against an unacceptable regime.
Right. Well, I mean, we had an article on the Sott page. Some guy wrote an article about this Andrew Columbus guy, and I posted a comment saying he sounds kind of like Ayn Rand. And then I started listening to his talk, and he does give a very interesting talk about the American Revolution, what it was, what was going on, and he makes a good argument for the fact that revolutions are kind of peaceful, and that what happened in the American Revolution is that there were two things that happened at one time. There was a revolution and a rebellion. And the rebellion was by a bunch of people who only wanted kind of representation in Parliament, that they didn't really have a fundamental problem with King George, except that they weren't being represented. They just didn't want to be overly taxed, and they wanted to be represented. And they said in all their documents, whatever you do, don't say independence. And then at the same time, there was this intellectual revolution that was going on, which was, hey, a minute, we don't need a king, and we should be able to decide stuff. So there's like two things. People like conflate revolutions with rebellions, and armed rebellions are really kind of ineffectual things, like as you have seen with the French Revolution or the French Rebellion, as it were. It just led to one worse thing after another.
Yeah, exactly. If you use your terminology and we study rebellions, called revolutions, by their fruits you shall know their true nature. Exactly. And when you see the results, when you check the results of those so-called revolutions, most of the time it led to regimes and to a state where human beings, where the people was even worsely treated than previously.
Well,
and right now, if you look at the so-called people revolution in Northern Africa, in Muslim countries, you can see that they lead to regimes that are even more despotic and more unfair to the people.
did you know that after the American Revolution was the revolution was won, they actually wanted to make George Washington the King of America?
Mm.
And the only reason that it didn't happen is because he said no.
He refused.
Because he had been converted by, like, Thomas Paine to this idea of, wait a minute, there shouldn't be a king.
Well,
So that's basically the whole thing. They actually asked him to be King of America. There was going to be an American king. So this whole, this grand ideal about this stuff was not really what happened in the American Rebellion Revolution. And the same thing with the French,
After the French Revolution, there was a period of several years that was rightly so called the Terror.
The terror.
Because it was a time of terror where basically everybody was killing everybody. It was a bloodbath where the guillotine was being used intensively.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole idea of freedom and liberty and all those noble ideals don't really mean very much to the average person on the street.
No, the Constitution of the United States of America details the rights and privileges of the United States government. The government that they instituted does not say the people once. It doesn't even talk about the people. Because the Bill of Rights, the amendments that they put on after the fact, but looking at the Constitution, you know exactly who was in there and exactly what they were trying to do and exactly what they were thinking. It was all about, we make laws and we can change them at any point without notice. And, I mean, it's this whole, my constitutional rights is really kind of a joke because the Constitution doesn't say anything about your rights. It talks about the composition and rights of the senators and the representatives and who votes where, how, and how much they get paid and who has control over what.
So, to what extent, then, is it a natural development based on the nature of human beings on the planet that there is an elite in power on the planet today? Because the average person can entertain, and I'm talking here about differences in intellect and differences in intellectual capacity, let's say, or proclivities towards. Not everybody is born equal in that sense, right? There are factors at work there. That doesn't mean anybody's less than anybody else, but there are certain people that are more inclined to, intellectual or ideological kind of pursuits.
No one's equally smart, no one's equally tall, equally fat, equally fast.
So, the average person on the street just wants the freedom to live their life reasonably comfortably and get on with doing what they want to do. And they're happy enough, obviously, to work, and they tend to work at what ideally they would work at what they're inclined towards, and you can see from that perspective how people who just have those priorities, that limit on their priorities, basically, which is totally understandable for most people, because I think that's one thing that everybody shares. But then there are people who tend towards, wanting to look at the broader picture and to theorize and develop philosophies and ideas and intellectual pursuits, basically. And not everybody wants that. Not everybody maybe is even capable of that.
Right.
So it seems to me that it's natural, in a sense, that there would be this a spectrum, let's say, rather than a class or a division or whatever, but a spectrum among humanity.
There is.
And so all these ideas that are touted and mooted to people about liberty and freedom and stuff, it doesn't really mean anything to the average person in America today. For example, these ideas of liberty and freedom. So what does that mean practically to these people? And it's only when, my point here is that it's only when the practical applications of all those noble ideals are infringed or are not put into practice, are not there, not available for them. For example, they don't have the ability to, even to get a job or to feel productive or to have enough money or enough resources to buy food to feed themselves. When they're suffering physically, that's when they start complaining, and they're not necessarily complaining about where are our freedoms and our liberties and all of our rights necessarily. Where's my bread and where's the roof over my house, over my head, and
well, generally speaking, I always think that the mass of the people really are fundamentally unaffected by the presence or lack of liberty in any real sense. They never do anything that would call it into question. They never use it or exercise it in any real sense. A bricklayer who lays bricks every day of his life, the most free speech he uses is to curse the fact that he has to lay brick, not that he doesn't have time or any real care for those things. I'm not saying anything against a bricklayer. It's perfectly fine. But the average person in the United States, a good 90% of the population, the fact that they have free speech, they don't even use it. I mean, except maybe to say a couple of dirty jokes every now and again. I mean, that's the extent of their freedom of speech. They listen to Eminem. That for them, that's freedom of speech. The fact that he can, talk about those things on the radio and things, that's them as freedom of speech. None of them ever do anything or are assuming enough for the police to ever want to search and seize anything that they don't own anything that the police would or the government would want to take or confiscate. They don't own any property that the government would want to confiscate. So that freedom and liberty kind of like more affect the people on the fringes of society and not those. The only time that they suffer from it is when it has gotten to such a point that it's about to collapse, and it collapses on their head, and then like, oh, why did this happen? It's so horrible. And then, of course, they can be motivated to go one way or the next. But
there's other people who can see that coming from a distance off.
See it coming from a distance off and say, you're going to be sorry if you don't stop this now.
But to what
because
extent,
they're violating me now, but pretty soon this is going to come on.
To what extent can you really impress upon people that
you can't? You've never been able to.
It's as if there were to be schematic here and maybe simplify. So if you have three kinds of people, you have the big majority of human beings who want their simple needs to be fulfilled. And it's totally legitimate, and it should be fulfilled. Health and a shelter and clothes and some education and some food and that's perfectly legitimate.
And that's the purpose of government.
That might be that might be 90% of the population, maybe. And then you have, and they are by nature mostly followers, because they're probably aware that leadership is not what they want. They might not be able for it. For various reasons, they are followers. And then you have two other categories. I mean, you have leaders, or the one who have ideas. You have potential leaders. And within the potential leaders, you have a very small percentage who are really populist in the fundamental sense of the term, serving the people. The GFK or Julius Caesar, to go back in history, who aim to serve the collective good, and you have other leaders who aim to serve themselves. And for a long time, the ruling leaders have been the one of this latest category, the psychopathic ones who aim to exploit them.
It's people who recognize what we just kind of said there about the nature of human beings, and perhaps the majority of human beings, that they don't have these highfalutin, elevated proclivities in terms of intellectual pursuits, etc. And they see that and they realize, and they have an empathetic approach or feeling towards them, that they need to be taken care of, essentially,
right.
But then there are other people who see that equally as something to be exploited.
Well, freedom and liberty shouldn't be seen as an affectation, though, at the same time. It shouldn't be about sentimentality. I think that there's a group of people who recognize that humanity as a whole is this gigantic kind of like living organism on the planet. And that not all aspects of it are active at any one time. It's a very large mass. From any area in that mass, something wonderful can spring up. Something evolutionarily beneficial to the entire race can come from any sector. A Mozart can be born to even the lowliest person in their thing. Some great, fantastic part of the spirit of man can come from anywhere, and then therefore the mass of people should not be oppressed, exploited, destroyed, murdered, raped, pillaged in any way. That they should be made sure that they are provided for, that no one should be starving in the streets, no one should have to turn to lives of crime, all these different things. They should be protected from predatory people and from predatory animals and from disease, that you should develop and cultivate humanity, because we as a massive body have to progress into the future and be a part of the living system that is the earth. And there are some people who look at that mass and they see them as a source of food for their greed, and monetarily work, build me bigger houses, bigger all this different stuff. They see them as exploitable and expendable for their self-aggrandizement. The STS kind of way of looking at things, a very self-serving way of looking at things. And that so that basically, when we talk about like why people in the early, Thomas Paine and all these different people, and even Thomas Jefferson, why they wrote and said the kind of things they did, and wanted to create this idea of liberty, let's get rid of the king, because they saw that as being the ultimate representation of the other way of seeing kings and aristocrats and elites as being this kind of small mass of people who see everyone else as an exploitable resource that they can take from. And these other guys realized, because a lot of them themselves came from somewhat humblish backgrounds in England, came over to America, and then became the great thinkers that we think of them today through self-education and through, Benjamin Franklin was a great scientist and things like this. That they realized that you can come from anywhere.
And so this freedom and liberty discussions, actually, it probably that it's an important thing, not so much concerning the masses. Maybe you have a majority of people who are being followers, and the nature of their orientation will depend on the influence that the leaders exert on them and on the world they create for them or they help them create. So the influence is essential.
Right.
So liberty and freedom is an essential tool, not for the masses necessarily, not for the followers, but for potential leaders who want to change things. And for the good, quote-unquote, potential leaders, freedom, truth, information, liberty are an essential tool, because it's through those tools that they can reach the masses and show the situation as it is and try to change the orientation of the masses. So that there's a big power game between those two different kind of potential leaders.
We have a couple of questions here. Well, this one that's kind of on topic. Is it even possible nowadays that any normal empathic human being can rise to the top of a Western country? Or in other words, is it even possible nowadays that a non-psychopath or pathological can rise to the top?
No.
We discussed that several times. Maybe the last one was Kennedy. Maybe in some smaller countries it occurred more recently.
There've been quite a few actually. Even recently, in
smaller countries. Yeah.
Well, Benazir Bhutto for one. But as you know, all of these people that I would cite would all be are all people who have been assassinated. So.
No, I don't think so.
What?
Not really. I don't think that a good person would rise to the top. I don't think that that's what's necessary. I think that people are holding out for hope that somehow some good person is going to become president. I think that in a certain sense, maybe even Barack Obama really did have some genuine idea of being a decent person, because you see how he's kind of grayed and gotten old looking, and he seems drained, kind of like Jimmy Carter was, and they kind of got old real quick. But it doesn't matter if you're good in that situation. It's only going to be worse for you, to be quite honest. You're only going to get torn apart far quicker.
Problem is you need two features to be a good leader, what we call a good leader. You need two features that are usually mutually exclusive. You need to have a good heart, this love of people, of humanity. At the same time, you need a very sharp knowledge to not fall in the trap of the one who will pull your strings. Because a lot of good leaders with a good heart have been manipulated and ended up doing things that were detrimental.
They've been naive, essentially, is the problem. I think
again, psychopathy, knowledge of psychopathy is key.
The combination that's very rare, is the good heart and the kind of deep understanding of evil. Or at least a good understanding of the evil and how it works in this world, usually people with the good heart tend to get caught up in the love and light, everything's beautiful, and they don't see evil, or they don't want to see evil. So they're almost mutually exclusive, and it's very rare that you get someone who can keep those two.
In the 1700s, there was this kind of idea. It was new. It wasn't so much new, but it was kind of new for the English people. It was this idea that people didn't need a king, because people in America, they really thought that there's a king and there's the lords and there's the commons, and that's how it works. And all they wanted was a better king. And then some people came along and said, well, hold on a second, you don't need. It doesn't matter. Of course, there have been good kings. But mostly there have been bad kings. And good kings don't really do much, and bad kings don't really do much except what they do. And you don't need a king at all. And that's the question. People always have this false question, we need a better king. And today we have this whole false question of we need better elites or better rulers. And I think that the revolution of the mind that needs to take place is for us to ask exactly how much government do we really need?
Yeah.
Do we actually need these elites? Do we need somebody to go in and get himself elected and clean up the whole situation? It's like, do you need a better president? You know, maybe we should start asking how much government do we need?
Well, yeah, I think you're only talking. You have to really do end up having to split humanity up in a certain sense, because there's people who, not to go all biblical here, but those with eyes to see are able to see, and those with ears to hear are able to hear, and all that business, and those who won't see, can't see, and won't hear, and you know, the fate that awaits them probably isn't that good, you know. But then at the same time, we can't look at it from our perspective. You can't look at the fate of someone who doesn't really see and doesn't really care and doesn't even have the capacity to really, you know, consider such things. You can't look at any kind of fate that awaits them from the perspective of someone who does care about those things and does, you know, feel strongly about those ideas and does have the interest and the proclivities to look at those things. Because people who don't care, I mean, not that they don't suffer, but you know, there is a certain amount of suffering involved among the people today who see all of the stuff that's going on in the world and feel very frustrated and angry and and sad about it. But you have to remember that all of the people, there's probably a majority of the people on the planet who aren't seeing things the way you're seeing them, aren't seeing what you're seeing, and aren't interested in seeing what you're seeing. And they just want to live their lives out until whatever end awaits them. And of course, there's an end to everybody's life. So, you know, let's not get too sentimental about that. You know, everybody dies. So, you know, I would kind of caution against people, you know, worrying too much or getting too worked up about all of these people on the planet and what they could or couldn't do, because I think that the majority of the people on the planet can't do anything and won't do anything and don't want to do anything. They just want their normal, simple lives. And maybe a lot of them, I mean, it's a thorny issue, but maybe a lot of them actually enjoy. I mean, they've been programmed and infected with this kind of like dumbing down and crass, you know, fed in a diet of crass pop culture and, you know, kind of base human, you know, pandering to their base human desires. But who's to say they are not enjoying it?
Yeah, it's really bizarre because there was an article on MSNBC about the American dream is not so easy to achieve.
Yeah.
And this woman writes about this, and the American dream apparently is to own a house in suburbia.
Yeah,
and
even if the dream is that, and I tend to agree with Joe, and he say that there are some people who just want maybe a house and that quite enjoy the current life, and that's probably true. This being said, imperial powers and what we're living through now, and it's called democracy, but it's basically imperialistic, are based on the exploitation of people. And the dynamic of imperial power is systematically an increase in this exploitation. So it means a systematic reduction of the level of life quality of the masses. So even if a lot of people just have very simple needs and don't need much to be happy, in this imperialist system they get less and less. So inevitably you have a growing number of people who are unhappy. Well, you look at statistics right now about level of depression, levels of suicide. Obviously, the elites are exploiting so much that they are not even able to give the few things that most people ask for. Because maybe as well at some point it's mutually exclusive, happiness or satisfaction of the elites versus satisfaction of the people. If you factor in the psychopathic nature of the elites and their tendency to enjoy the suffering of human beings, so if they are satisfied, by definition the human people will be suffering because that's the cause of their satisfaction.
But obviously people aren't suffering very enough yet, especially not in the US.
That's a question.
You know, and like we said, maybe for a lot of people it comes down to the very basics, and it's only when the very basics are taken away from them that they will complain. And they won't be complaining, like we said before, about the stripping away of their liberties or the rubbishing or the tearing up of the Constitution. They'll be complaining about, I've got no food and I can't pay the rent on my apartment. Therefore, I've nowhere to live and I'm cold. Right. For a lot of people, it could be very, very basic needs like that. It's only when they are not fulfilled that they will actually do anything. Everything up to that point will make no difference.
They won't be able to do anything.
Well, exactly. And
that's I mean, like right now, I mean, even not so much right now. Actually, it's kind of gone. It's too late, actually, in my opinion. But I mean, like the time to do something was probably maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
And I don't think there was ever enough people on this planet who ever would have done anything. Enough people who actually cared enough. Most people just simply do not care. And, maybe I'm getting a bit cynical here, but really, I don't think most people care. I've had enough experience of ordinary people, who are fairly well educated, who have shown that they do not care, or that they care in a kind of selective empathy kind of way, but it's just like, yeah, whatever. And really, they just want to go back to their normal lives, And I think it's the people at the bottom that will actually, if there's some kind of a ultimate, if something's coming in the sense of disruption in society, it'll be the people at the bottom who have the least, who will first of all be rebelling, because they have just a little bit of stripping away of their creature comforts means that they will have nothing. Whereas people in the middle class and stuff, they've got a ways to go. They can lose their house, but then they can go into a smaller house. They have some financial resources. They can still feed themselves, that kind of thing, and they'll be happy with that. You know what I mean? Because those kind of people ultimately will just go along to get along and do not want any upset because it's too difficult. And they just want to live their normal lives. They just want to live their normal lives.
And that may be the current Western model of happiness is so widely promoted. Having a car, a house, the debt, a wife, or a husband, children, all those things are locking you and makes almost impossible for you to rebel because you love your family. You don't want to put them in danger.
How horrifying is it, though, that a person's ambition in life is to be nothing more than a consumer?
But that's what human beings are.
Well, no.
That's what most human beings are. They consume. I mean, it's at the...
and there's the influence. We have to keep in mind that in 21st century, in this world, the pornogenic influence are huge. Yeah. When you've been programmed since birth, and your parents and the parents of your parents and etc. have been programmed in this same paradigm, you don't know anything else. So I would not blame such people, and maybe something else. We are talking about suffering as a trigger for a kind of awakening or revolting. I think it's one necessary ingredient, but it's not sufficient. If you remember the Pavlov experiment about dogs, this transvaginal inhibition, you had some dogs after all those electric shocks that were just lying on the electrodes and not reacting anymore. So you need enough suffering, but you also need some proper knowledge and some kind of specific wiring inside this. Several ingredients are necessary. Suffering is not enough, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think that if there were ever enough people on this planet to really to do something about the state of the planet and the downward trend that it's taken, it would have been done a long time ago, And the fact that it hasn't been done, and isn't being done even right now, is kind of, for me, is evidence. Even allowing for polarization. I mean, the thorny issue of, well, would people really be in this state if they weren't under all of this influence from psychopaths in power? But you could also say that, well, why did they allow it to happen? Was it so devious? I mean, if people had the ability to see of all of this, if they were evolved enough and developed enough to see, and in touch with their own humanity enough to see the first few steps towards a kind of a fascist takeover or polarization of society, right then they would have all said, hang on a minute, this is not going any further.
Maybe that's what the point.
A whole load of them just went, cool, They didn't even notice.
Point. Maybe that ultimately is the point, though. I mean, if you buy into the whole evolution thing, which I don't, but it's okay. If you buy into the whole evolution thing, the basic idea being is that there are a large number of mutations in a population, and the majority of them don't succeed. Mm-hmm. And what really decides supposedly evolution is the population expands, lots of mutations, and then there's some sort of event, and the ones that are the most adaptable survive, and the large majority of the unsuccessful mutations die off.
Yep.
And so if we're talking about like an evolution of the mind and the ability to be perspicacious, then wouldn't this just be...
It might be the main lessons. If you look at history and those cycle of cosmic catastrophes happening after the peak of imperialistic operation, you start to wonder if every few centuries the same show starts, unravel, and there are two solutions. Either people open their eyes, react, and somehow progress and trigger a positive cosmic reaction, or at least no-negative cosmic reaction. Otherwise, game is over. You didn't learn the lesson. Yeah. We go back to square one. New operation, exactly. New cosmic reaction.
We don't go back to square one.
Yeah.
I don't think we do.
I mean, you go back to square one in sense of
but
evolution of society, structuration. You know? We start with from shacks and small population, and we start to expand.
I think that there are more people today who get it than there were probably in Roman times. You know?
Well, that's an interest.
I think that because like you go onto YouTube and like this DUI guy, he put that camera in his car and he intentionally got that cop to do what he knew he was going to do so that he could film it. Mm-hmm. And that guy's just a regular dude. He's not on our website. He's not some big, anti-government pundit. He's just a regular dude who got a camera, hid it in his car, and without being too overt, he knew that he had to do hardly anything, and he suckered that cop into doing exactly what he knew he was going to do. And that, to me, is very impressive for some regular dude driving along in his car. He didn't seem to be too terribly smart. He just said, this is messed up, and I'm going to... And he was brave. That was ballsy. What he did.
He wasn't the first.
And he wasn't the first, and he's not the only one. The YouTube is littered with people doing that stuff. And I think that it should give people a little bit of hope for the possibilities of humanity, because a lot of people do see there is something wrong with it,
I think it goes
against it.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. You have more people who get it right now compared to the Roman times, for example. At the same time, the one who don't get it much less, or it's much worse than people who didn't get it in the Roman times. Why? Because you had now you have this nefarious influence of mainstream medias. Before, you have populations that were scattered, and you have a lot of farmers that was basically the main source of knowledge was Earth, was the seasonal cycles, the crops. There was a lot of truth in it. Mm. So they didn't have much knowledge, but this knowledge was based on a lot of common sense, and there was a high truth ratio in their mind. Today, if you look at the one who don't get it, who are brainwashed by mainstream medias, are fed by a lot of lies, and they have almost no truth in them. No, you see what I mean? So both extremes are developing. The people who get it, there are more people who get it at the same time. There are more people who really don't get it at all. And when we're talking about this lie factor, because of those mainstream media spreading the same lies, you have a huge quantity, you have billions of people resonating on the same lie frequency, buying the same lie, the very same lie propagated by mainstream media all over the planet. So that's to be factored in as well for this human cosmic connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit of a thorny issue, but I think that this planet is kind of a bad place to be if, in terms of evolution and not being under the thumb of the psychopathic elite. It's a bad place to be if you don't have some kind of a spark, a sovereign spark of awareness, self-determination, or an ability to kind of spot the bullshit from the truth, the lies from the truth, because the powers that be are in a position where they have the ability to disseminate the lies and fill people up with lies and manipulate them and control them in that way. And it's not an ideal world. It's a test essentially where all of these lies are spread around, and those without the ability to spot them and really to say, well, that's bullshit, I'm not going with it. They just get filled up with lies, and that's life. That's the way it is. There's no way to change it or to make it all better or to revolutionize the world and create a utopia or Valhalla or whatever you want to call it. It's just I don't know.
That triggers another interesting factor. What I think is an aggravating circumstance. During the Roman Empire, for example, you didn't have this much knowledge, true or wrong, available. Today, a human being who chooses, consciously or not, to believe a lie faces an aggravating circumstance in the sense that the truth for most topics is out there.
Yep.
So it's more serious in a sense today to embrace lies because truth is available. In the past, most of the time, what was available was you had one version that was available, and the potential was for discernment, the freedom, the ability for discernment, available data was less prevalent, less developed.
Glenn Beck said recently, "We are living in biblical times. You better have your house in order."
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of rings true.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
For those who can hear it.
He's kind of
In
fun.
the context in which he was saying it was
He's so
awful.
fun. He's like the new Rush Limbaugh for me, I mean, he's so fun to watch.
He dropped that little pearl of wisdom in among a conversation about Syria, actually. It was the usual lies. In this case, he was talking about this video of a guy who kills someone, cuts his heart out, and eats a piece of it. I think we mentioned on last week's show.
Mm-hmm.
And about how those evil Russians who are supporting this guy against our government who's supporting the other side.
Well, you got that
which is
wrong.
a ball-faced lie, which is that
It was the other way around.
These cannibals are
being supported by the
US.
Yeah.
But he was using it as part of his sermon to say this. We are living in biblical times. I think he meant it more in the sense that there are strange times. You better have your house in order.
There will be wars and rumors of wars.
It might be worse than biblical time in a sense, because when you think about the 2345 BC event, end of the Bronze Age, for some scholars it was the flood event, and several evidence strongly suggest that it was due to some cometary activity, including dendrochronology records and studies about the ecliptic, the tilt of the planet. When you think about it, if the modulator of those cosmic reactions in this is this life factor, this human cosmic connection, at the time, 2300 BC, you had millions of people on the planet. You had a relatively small population. And as I said before, mostly farmers that had a lot of good sense and a lot of knowledge that was true. They were storing a lot of true knowledge. Today you have more than 7 billion people resonating on the same life frequency spread by the mainstream media. So if there's a correlation, I don't know about that, if there's a correlation between the intensity of the cosmic creation and the intensity, the coherence of the light signal emitted by humanity, you can imagine that the flood, the end of the Bronze Age, the biblical times, are nothing compared to what we might trigger.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Exciting.
Make sure you have your
tea and crumpet.
Make sure you have your dash cams switched on
thing
for
is,
that one.
I don't think all 7+ billion people are on that same life frequency. There are people who are paying attention in some way or another to something or other.
And there's a large...
And they're making their resistance known. For me, people getting out on the streets, this is a criticism I hear from commentators, usually on the left. Oh, good, they're out on the street, but what good will come of it because they have not defined their policy goals. They have not come up with a 4-point plan. I'm like, to hell with that. The point is, they the people are not that dumb. They know they'll have to go back to work because they got to feed the kids. They got to get home before the babysitter's going home because the kids are at home and there'll be no one there to look after them. They know they're only there to make a statement. The point is that they're on the streets and they're saying to the cosmos, I am here. I'm sick of it. Hear me. And I think that is the point of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an anecdote. We were talking recently about how people perceive the current regime, how people perceive the world right now, our society, our modern society. And it was really striking because maybe 90% of people I interacted with over the last month, they all were saying the same. They all were so fed up with what is going on. They were also disgusted by what we're doing to our fellows, to our planet. It's as if, sure, they have to go on with a normal life. They have to feed the kids. They have to keep on working. But at the same time, it's as if they're just waiting a spark. They're just waiting a leader. They're just waiting for this movement that answers their deepest aspiration to materialize in order to follow it and to join it. Because I think right now, because there's so much debate and there's been so much oppression that for most people are not even happy anymore. Even the simpleness are
what
not.
people are you talking about?
Well, it was various people locally, here in France.
They're complaining about what?
But it was about corruption of the politicians, about the destruction of the planet, about the lies in the media, about 9/11, about the. They were pretty.
Do you think they're representative?
Supposedly 80% of the French people polled believe that the French government is corrupt. It was some corruption index that they pass around.
But isn't that the same for every government in the France?
Well, yeah, but I mean, at least people, recognize that there is corruption, and they don't think there's anything to do with it. But before we get too far away, I think that the elites are planning for this movement that you're talking about. People are waiting. They are cultivating the leaders of their resistance. They are cultivating their Emmanuel Goldsteins and people like, Julian Assange and even possibly the Snowden character. I don't know. So that people at the same time, there's this mass wave of motion among the people who want something done. And then I believe, my personal opinion is the strategy of the elites is to put in their path to become a leader someone who will try to turn them violent. And it is the most important thing in the world that people understand that violence is definitely the worst idea you could possibly come up with against them, because they've got these huge, massive private armies with 1 billion hollow point bullets just waiting for that to happen. They're trying to cultivate that. So when you see that you have this motion of people, it's a dangerous situation. It's good, but the one thing that people, they cannot be naive. They have to remember the experiences of the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King and with Mahatma Gandhi. The only solution is a peaceful solution. The only true revolution can be a peaceful revolution. It can only be a revolution of education and belief and philosophy. And if you try or allow yourself to be seduced with reacting violently to what's going on, you are only going to kill yourself, and you will not accomplish anything from it. Because you will justify what they will do to you, which is bomb the hell out of you, kill you all, arrest you, put you into internment camps. And everyone in the middle classes and the satisfied classes will think that it's justified because, well, you were being violent. Well, it happened.
Lisa says she agrees, but, for example, in Palestine, the people have been forced into using violence to protect themselves, to defend themselves.
Well, it's legitimate self-defense.
But that's slightly different from what we're talking about. In Palestine, it's a long-term, ongoing occupation, and
Gandhi said that if it's only a choice between it's only a choice between cowardice and violence, then pick violence. If you have no other choice,
which they don't.
Which the Palestinians don't in a certain sense. But they're not going to accomplish their goals through violence. There's absolutely no that. Yeah, you have to do it. I mean, you don't want them to kill your little child right there. So yeah, you're going to do something, but you're probably actually going to make it worse anyway. Yeah, basically, they're in a situation where they're going to lose.
The Palestinians have been put in a petri dish, basically, and they've been experimented on in the sense that they've been corralled and periodically murdered and slaughtered and had their children killed to the point where people who have had a family member killed will just go and get a gun and go and attack the Israelis. I mean, that's not a planned kind of revolution in a sense, and Hamas aren't doing. Have never done anybody any favors in Palestine, really. But it's a terrible situation actually in Palestine, and it's a testimony to just the evils of the Zionist regime, just how bad it is there. But we're kind of talking here about some kind of mass kind of revolution, either in one or two specific countries, or in America or somewhere like that. That violence.
Here's the thing. Do you want
to
succeed or not? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. I mean, you can't win by fighting them. Like the Palestinians are not going to win anything by fighting. They're not going to win anything, period, because Israel and all of the other countries have conspired against them, and in a certain sense they are kind of lost, which is unfortunate. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy what goes on there. But, I mean, they can't win for losing. But in the West, with the Western powers, when you're talking about Western powers and Western countries, there's things that were shown by Gandhi and things that were shown by Martin Luther King is that you can only win by losing in a certain sense. As unfortunate as it is, it's whether or not you want success. Do you want success for your children and your children's children, or do you want the immediate pleasure of getting revenge on the person who strikes you or spits on you or stomps you or crushes you?
That takes a particular type of person and a particular type of... I mean, not everybody would have that perspicacity or that self-control to be able to do that.
Martin Luther King, in one of his interviews, he talks that a lot of black people had come up to him and were saying, like, yes, but you ask us to go to these demonstrations and they're spitting on us and they're kicking us and they're setting dogs on us and they're beating us. And it's like, I just can't take that. And he turned around and he said to the guy, he says, your children grow up in abject poverty and their children will grow up in it. They are separated from society. They are abused and degraded constantly in every corner of their lives. They are prevented from ever rising up. You are prevented from ever rising up and reaching your full potential. You are denied education. You are denied the right to vote. You are denied all these things. You live in constant suffering. But the thing that makes you want to do something about it is only if someone kicks you and spits on you and calls you a racial slur. I mean, and that's the same situation you have here. I mean, think about the world. Think about your children and your children's children and what kind of world are they going to grow up in, And you getting kicked or put into prison or even killed. I mean, wouldn't you die for your children?
Maybe one point that has to be clarified or emphasized is that peaceful revolution doesn't mean doing nothing.
No.
It means doing a lot,
actively.
but in a peaceful way. If today, let's be utopic, if today because what we have to understand, the premise is that all the power, all the legitimacy, all the resources of the elite come from the exploitation of the people. Once the people don't provide this work, don't play into this exploitation, the elites are powerless. If tomorrow you have all the military, all the cops who drop their weapon on the floor, you have all the power supplier that cut the energy providing to the government buildings, if you have all the drivers, the chauffeurs who stop driving the VIPs and the mechanics stopping fixing their cars and the personnel stopping cleaning their house, then the elites, the king is naked. The elites have no more power. The people, it's almost a paradox, the people are the ones who give the power to the elite that use it to exploit and destroy these very same people.
I mean, simply the act of not participating actively in the system is itself doing something. Not buying Coca-Cola, not buying this stuff, not watching TV. It's actually really kind of an act against that system. And you just go from there. Just, things you don't do to support the system. And if a lot of people don't do them, then you would surprise how quickly the power of the elites would fail when they don't have access to, because it's you constantly putting into the machine. The more energy you put into the machine, the more they get to take out to do things to you. As long as you're participating in the system and participating in the machine, you're giving them energy. The minute you stop that, which doesn't require much at all from you, just a little bit of will, decide not to eat that particular thing or buy that particular product, And I mean, the civil rights movement had great success with boycotts against certain companies to the point where a lot of them almost went bankrupt until they were forced to change their policies about African Americans, because if they didn't have anybody buying from their stores because they were located in areas that were mostly populated by African Americans.
Yeah, and this consumerism awareness is positive in a sense, but it's sad as well because apparently over the last decades, most of the political revendications in the people were focused on the consumer side, i.e., consume organic food or consume those or wear the shirt that was made by employees that are not exploited, and that's probably a positive thing. But at the same time,
how about making your own clothes?
It hides all the other facets of political activity. Yeah. You know, consumerism should only be one small part of the political consciousness of people.
Well, I mean, there's this kind of an Aesop fable, which I'm always a big fan of, where it's a man goes into a forest. I don't know if this is the Aesop version. This might be a different version. Man goes into a forest, and he goes up to a tree, and he begs him, please, 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 can I have one of your branches? And the tree saying, well, I've got so many branches. Maybe I'll just give you a branch. And the tree gives him a branch, and he goes and he puts a metal head on it, and makes an axe, and comes and chops the tree down. The moral of the story being, we often give our enemies that thing which they require most to destroy us. And that is what we're talking about here, our participation in such a strong consumerism system. And even in the fair trade thing, that has become so commercialized. They now have these giant commercial organizations that put these stamps on, and they have these, and each little product has like 5 or 6 different, well-designed graphically stamps: bio, equitable, fair trade, all this different stuff. And it's become a business. It's become the exact opposite of what it was intended to be. And so you shouldn't just be buying products because of those things. I mean, you should start thinking of, do I really need to buy that product at all?
So, I think that at least unconsciously in a lot of people there is this frustration, the desire to revolt, the sense that something is wrong, and the elites that are not stupid probably aware of that and channel this energy on the wrong causes, for the wrong battles. So, for example, in France, for months and months, the main topic has been, shall we authorize or not gay weddings? And France is split in two. So
ridiculous.
The elites are giving those wrong dualities, those wrong debates, those petty topics to channel this revolt energy or this sense that something is wrong, at least, in people. Mm-hmm. And it's diversion. And by focusing their energy on those petty topics, they forget the bigger picture and the real fundamental problems.
Yeah, talking about the nonviolent reaction, I think if people just do what certain leaders throughout the ages have advocated, which is, nonviolent
civil disobedience
and nonviolence to affect change, what you're really doing in a world as polarized as this one is that you are demonstrating your humanity in the face of inhumanity. You're asserting your humanity, and that is probably the single most powerful thing you can do, because obviously it's not natural for human beings to go on a bloody rampage and kill their neighbors and fight and have wars and cut each other's heads off and stuff like that. That's inhumanity, and that's like John Lennon said. Once like John Lennon said, once they get you angry and fighting, that's when they know how to deal with you, because that's what they do basically. So to be violent in an effort to affect change is just playing their game and putting yourself where they want you to be, but and where they know how to deal with you. But to be peaceful, it takes an awful lot more self-control, restraint and stuff, but that has the best chance of affecting any change in the jackbooted thugs that have been sent to wipe you all out. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's only, by demonstrating your own humanity, by not reacting violently to these people who come to do violence on you, any humanity left within them may be
shamed
or awoken or something, and that's the best chance you have. But like I said, it takes
like right now in Guantanamo Bay, in the prison, there's a hunger strike going on, and they're force feeding, and they're abusing, obviously, because they always do this stuff. And this thing was supposed to be closed. I mean, Obama promised it, and he hasn't. I mean, people should be up in arms about this. But I think that right now, I mean, think of what would happen if everybody in America decided to go on a hunger strike. Not the people who are in prison, just decided not to buy any food from the store for like 1 week, 7 days. You'd totally survive. I mean, that would be like a crushing blow to the economy if nobody bought food and nobody ate anything and everybody just sat around and said, you know what, I'm not going to eat either. And those are the types of things that you can do, you know, in the world today right now. Just, you know, don't participate and say, hey, I'm not going to eat either, you know? I mean, there's plenty of ways to disobey and protest things.
The thing is, for any peaceful action to be effective, it has to be global. And for an action to be global or global enough to affect the leaders or the elites, it has to be coordinated. And we go back to the debate about the nature of the elites and the coordination and the leadership.
One of the main focuses that Martin Luther King always said is that you have to intentionally suffer yourself. That there is something transformative about consciously suffering for your cause. That was his main thing. His main point, and he says it in all of his speeches, not all of them, but most of his speeches, he talks about the transformative nature of consciously and willfully suffering for your goal, that you cannot get it for free. You must purchase it with your suffering. And that is ultimately the core. When you go to that demonstration, you do want them to get a little abusive. You don't want them to kill you, but you expect to get beaten. You expect to get put into prison. You expect to be abused and called names. You expect to suffer at their expense because that is how you purchase the freedom that they wanted.
And you're also increasing the chances that you'll serve as an example of the tyranny to other people. I mean,
traumatization.
You can be the spark that awakens people up to just how bad things are when they see the cop beating you around the head type of thing. And the more people get beaten, the more other people who aren't there will sit up and say, hang on a minute, that's not right. So that is needed, obviously, to expose the corrupt and evil nature of the elite on this planet today, because they do it so, they work their evil so subtly and so, you know, in such an underhanded way that most people don't recognize it because they mask it. And it's only in situations like you've described where they have to show their hand, where people are out protesting peacefully, and the system has to show its evil hand by it has no way to control. These people have seen through the charade and are out there protesting and stating truths. And the only response that the psychopathic system and the psychopathic elite can have to that is to beat it down and try and destroy it, make it go away. And in the process of doing that, there's a chance that other people will see the evil for what it is, to unmask it.
During the Turkish protest last month, began peacefully in the sense there was not a riot, it was a mass protest on the main square in Istanbul. After a few days, riot police with Made in USA gear sent in, beat everyone over the head. Government thought, well, that's dealt with. And then this one guy flouted the new law, which was you're not allowed to be in the square. He just went in and he stood there. He just stood there alone. 8 hours.
Which is difficult.
A few more people came and they just stood there silent with him, looking the same way, not talking to him, just standing there. And a week later, it was called the Taksim Square Book Club. People were just to pass the time initially, but then they made a point of bringing books to the square and reading them. Any book. But the ones I saw being read most often were books like 1984, George Orwell. Yeah. That's making a point.
It is. It makes a point.
And what are they going to do?
But if you think about it, that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to stand there all day. That's not a pleasurable experience.
No.
And the problem that people have with demonstrations today is that they go to the demonstrations and it makes them yell, and they scream, and they kind of turn it into a party, like the Occupy Wall Street people. They were kind of like just having a party. And they didn't understand that the fundamental concept behind a good demonstration is one and where you're not enjoying it. You are suffering for your goal, and that kind of is the core That is why Gandhi's movement succeeded, and that's why, for a large part, King's movement succeeded as well, because there was a large amount of suffering that people could see, and that it did, as he said constantly, is necessary to dramatize the situation, to show the suffering enlarged and even exaggerated for the people, so they can see that in this one instant they can see a large magnified version of the suffering that we are experiencing every day in small ways over the entire course of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exposing it.
You have to expose it.
I mean, people want to expose the evil, you know. That's what all the conspiracy theorists have been doing for years, trying to expose the government and expose this and expose everything that's going on. But it hasn't been that effective, you know. And what seems to be far more effective and gets far more attention, even from the bought and paid for mainstream media, is when people consciously, like Jason was saying, consciously suffer for that goal in a very simple way. They're just saying, no more, I don't agree, and I'm going to put not just my mouth, but I'm going to put my body, you know, where
my mouth is.
Not yeah.
I mean, Gandhi was always fasting until something happened. He was, I'm not going to eat until it's done, and he almost died a few times.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
Anyway, we've kind of run over our time here, and we had lots of comments. There was some intense debate going on the chat room.
Who won the debate?
I don't know.
What was it
was
about?
a tie between them all. It was just about all and everything. I think we should save it and publish it somewhere. But so that's been our Plan B show for this week. We've covered a bunch of different topics, but as you can see, any one topic can take quite a long time to discuss, and we didn't even really scratch the surface of most of it. But we hope you enjoyed it, and we thanks to our listeners for listening in and for commenting and for your questions. We will be back next week with another show. It may be Hank Albarelli. It may not. We have to find out about that. But
I think we should do this again, to be honest.
We can do this.
Fun show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe not again. Maybe not every week. Well, maybe every week. We'll see.
I don't know. I kind of had fun tonight.
Yeah. Anyway, we hope you all had fun too, and we will see you or hear you next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Over and out.